Welcome to the new edition of the podcast on change dynamics. And tonight we're absolutely pleased to have the presence of Juli Geske-Peer. And she's here not only because she just finished the book on change, which is called 5 Senses of Success, and we'll talk about that in a while, certainly, but she's also here because she has a big experience that she's sharing in the book as well. And the experience is on a broad area. It's on coaching, it's on leadership, it's on executive advising. She has done her job on many areas. And I think we're very lucky to have her tonight to share all that experience with us. And I would say that she has quite some personal experience that is being taken care of in the book. The book is based on the personal experience that she has from Peer Performance Solutions, one of the companies that she founded. She's also been active as mediation and a conflict resolution, and she has been on leadership and known as a coach as well. And not only in commercial areas, but also as a volunteer. So I think we're absolutely happy to have her here tonight to see if we could share some ideas on change dynamics, and certainly the human dynamics in this area, because that's where I think the professional subject is all about. It's all about change and what role human plays in that change. It was interesting to see that the Harvard Business Review very recently published a research saying that 75% of success of change factors is the human element, which I think is a huge number, 75%. I would probably have said there would be a lower number, but it proves that change and human element is very much connected. So as I said, we're absolutely pleased and delighted to have Juli on the show tonight. And Juli, is anything you'd like to add as an introductory comment to what I've just said?
Sure, I would love to. But first, I just want to say thank you so much, Diane and Jeroen, for having me here on Change Dynamics. And hello to all the listeners out there. I'm so thrilled to be here. With regard to my background, I have spent years working in leadership in organizations, most of them in consulting and research firms where we were working with very large global clients around the world, as well as smaller clients, manufacturing to nonprofit. And that's kind of what I do in my business, which I started in 2014 as well. So I span that same kind of different types of organizations, from corporate, global, multinational to small local nonprofit. So I am a consultant, coach, and trainer. I am also a mediator, as Jan mentioned. And so I'm a qualified neutral for the state where I live in Minnesota in the US. And my education is a bachelor's degree in communication and a master's degree in organizational leadership. So where I focus my time now is helping organizations and individuals to lift performance. And more often than not, that is involved in change process, because that is a constant in organizations nowadays. So that's a little bit more about me. And I have just published a book in late May.
Great, thank you very much. And I think Jeroen has one of the first questions that is exactly related to your introduction. So Jeroen, go ahead.
You're also certified Baldrige performance expert. And the nice thing there, of course, is Baldrige is, I think, quite hardcore.
Yes, it's very hardcore.
It's very hardcore. So
yes.
And how do you combine that hardcore approach with the soft skills you're focusing at in your book? And I think also what I see in the rest of the things I read about you.
Well, the type of things that I do under that Baldrige umbrella formally are some assessments of organizations under that framework.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm doing more on a volunteer basis. But because I've been trained in that, I embed that into the various learnings that I've amassed over the years into how I manage projects with clients. So I'm less formalized in the way I work, but I definitely use frameworks in terms of change. I've actually created my own change model, if you will. Yeah. I analyzed a bunch of models, Baldrige and others like Cotter, ADKAR, AIM, etc. And I kind of came up with my own that worked for me. And I use that in change with organization. So I would say it informed, but I don't fully utilize that when I'm doing the work that I do with organizations. But when I'm working to assess an organization, obviously I'm working directly under that paradigm.
What are the elements of your own model you're using?
Yeah, well, I have a number of them, from assessing and identifying needs through, identifying exactly what your change is going to be, determining a vision and how that's going to work, the values behind it, preparing and planning for the change, communicating it, implementing it, and then reinforcing it and kind of monitoring, checking back. What I think is interesting about any change model, whether that's mine or anybody else's, is that we have these models and they all have steps. They can be circular or linear, whatever it may be, but it never happens in that line. It happens, or in that circle of, process, it happens all over the place, right? You have to go back and forth throughout those change models. So that's what I focus on when I'm talking to clients, whatever change process we may use. If they have one that they prefer embedded, if we're using mine, I talk about that back and forth that happens.
Mm-hmm. And the one of the elements of the Baldrige model is leadership. And how would is your vision on leadership related to self-control? Because I would say that let's say that the human-based leadership is different from a techie kind of leadership. What would be your vision on that?
Yeah, so I actually have an ebook that I've written that I call The Hard and Soft of Leadership. So I believe that traditional managerial practices, which might be more hardcore, numbers focused, process focused, that kind of thing, less people focused, and the more new wave of thinking leadership and soft skills really should be combined. And I think that in leadership, we need both. We need those, harder skills of how do we manage budget? How do we manage process? Project management is very key, whether it's a change management paradigm or just general project management. So that is needed, along with how do we relate and collaborate and build trust and learn to influence and motivate. Those need to be combined to be effective as a leader. I also believe that there are formal leadership roles, but that we all have opportunity to show leadership in any role. And so whoever might be engaged in change, whether they are leading it or not, has an opportunity to play a leadership role. I often call this personal leadership, and we have that ability to display leadership in a way that helps something move forward, helps a goal be reached. In mediations, one of the things that are key is that you have these two parties or sides coming in who've had a history of conflict. And the goal is to figure out where are their commonalities and how do we help them move forward from those commonalities. So I like to also embed that into the whole leadership arena, whether formal or informal.
Right. Implicitly, you also mentioned trust and believe in people. Now, the basic idea that Jeroen and I discovered whilst writing the book, The Project Saboteur, is that the world does not only consist of the goodies, but there's also the baddies who really like to break your project down. So how does your, let's say, personal vision, your philosophy affect the attitude towards leadership and the way you look upon trust and people?
Yeah, so the people who are resistant to change for whatever reason, I believe it's often due to a fear factor of some sort. So they have built an identity around a certain way of conducting work. And as the change is occurring, they see that identity, that way of doing work, that way they've built success is altering. And typically there's a fear factor of, as this alters, am I still going to be successful? Am I still going to know what I'm doing? So I try to address that without necessarily calling it that, by asking them, how will this impact you? What do you see as the barriers that may occur? Where do you see challenges to reaching our goal? And by giving them an opportunity to voice what's happening inside for them, sometimes they will outright say, I'm actually scared of it, right? Sometimes they will be that in tune. And sometimes they will just bring up things that kind of hint at that. And so then addressing those things and getting them to help brainstorm toward how to address those, because then you're in that co-creating space, and it's that co-creating space that can help build trust. And by building trust, then we can help everybody move forward. And hopefully, most often, you're going to actually hear things that will help you address the change anyway, because if that one person that may be more resistant is feeling that, there are probably others feeling that as well. And so you can address it more forthrightly with the larger.
Yeah, and then you implicitly mentioned one of the senses of your book, right?
Well, so I can talk a little bit about that if this is a good time. So what I did with my senses is I took the traditional or typical 5 senses that most of us realize. So see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. And I've altered them into what I see as more deep and meaningful senses. I also see them as more intentional. Sometimes when we use our traditional senses, we are a little bit passive about it. We may hear something on the street, but we're not really paying attention to it. We may even be in a conversation and not be really hearing somebody. So I've shifted those traditional senses into observe, listen, feel, engage, and appreciate. And some of those are pretty easy to see how they shift. For instance, see to observe, but some of them are a little bit more difficult to see, like taste to engage or smell to appreciate. And what I do in the book is explain kind of how I came to that. So those latter senses are a little more multi-sensory. And so we need to embed all of those other senses to make an engagement successful or to appreciate somebody. And when we do those things effectively, we actually can help build trust. We can actually build our influence with people, again, whether or not we're in a formal leadership role, and we can have impact on the people around us. So going back to the mediation thing, I mentioned this earlier. One of the things that I also do is coach, conflict coaching, it's called. And I might meet with just one person that is in a conflict, but by just helping them change how they show up to the conflict, it can shift how the whole dynamic works. So you don't need everybody to be on the same page. You just need a few to help you move the project forward, and it will actually happen.
Right. And have you put appreciation deliberately as one of the last, so that you observe first and then go to what you think about it and make a judgment, or is this just by chance?
Well, it's probably somewhat building on, but I don't see them as linear where you have to go through them, if you will, or even cyclical where you go around the cycle. I see them more as kind of intertwined, and that you need all of them to really have successful collaborations and successfully move work forward. So that would be true for personal goals and for group goals. So one of the elements I build into the book is that there's both using these senses with self and using these senses with others. So often we don't observe ourselves or listen to ourselves, our own thoughts as well. That might be less auditory, but more internal, right? Probably the biggest challenge for most people is self-appreciation. I think we're very good at judging ourselves and less good at appreciating ourselves. And it's that factor that can often get in the way of change processes. So that fear I mentioned earlier in that resistant party is likely based on they don't feel confident, they don't feel sure. And so how do you help them build that? More confidence, and you have to have kind of both sides of that, external and
of course, very depending also on the type of person. If you have a group of people, there's always one that makes a lot of noise, and there's always one that is quite silent in the corner. So, and that broad spectrum is always difficult to manage.
It is. And one of the things that I like to talk about in the book is under the listen paradigm, is in those circumstances where you have somebody very vocal or you have somebody very quiet, asking questions and you can direct them. So on the vocal party, try to dig deeper into what is leading to their commentary. For the silent person, asking them direct questions to try and get them to bring out their thoughts.
If you would look at management, there's not a certain order in which you need to read the book, because that's a nice thing. I like the book for the fact that it's based upon separate chapters. I think you could read any chapter at any moment in any order. So that's helpful. If I would be a manager and I would be on a flight from New York to Chicago, I don't know the time of that flight, but let's assume I have a 1 hour flight. Which chapter would you advise to read?
I think that I would say as a launch pad, if you only wanted to dig into one chapter, I would suggest listen. I think that often our relationships derail because of lack of true listening. And by true listening, I mean the ability to set one's own perspective and thoughts aside and try to be in a space where you're trying to understand the other's perspective and thoughts. So asking what I call discovery questions, and really trying to dig deeper into what is it that they believe, what is it they think is important, what is it they think are what barriers do they see, and trying to understand the other first before trying to collaborate, trying to brainstorm. Any of those I think is the most effective. So if I had to choose just one, I would say listen.
Yeah, but then you would do the listening before appreciation.
Well, so it's very difficult for me because these are all my babies, right? But I think that it's much more difficult to appreciate somebody in the way that they will feel appreciated if we don't fully understand them.
Exactly.
And so listening is key to that. So is observing, so is understanding, their perspective as a whole. And so, yes, I would say if we had to put them in an order, but I believe that even before we fully know another, we can show appreciation. So there, even in difficult relationships I've had in the workplace in the past, or if I have a difficult client relationship, which can happen, I try to be very consciously saying what I value about them out loud so that they feel that. And then I also try to be doing the things I talked about in the listening. So it's kind of simultaneous, if you will. That's why I say they're intertwined.
Right, and that also means that this is your basic view on how leadership and change management should be done, I presume.
Yes. Yeah. So in leadership, our goals are need teams, right? So we may have personal goals, but even our personal goals often need team members to be successful. So if we are trying to aim for a specific set of goals, we need to collaborate with our colleagues as other executives, with our team members, with people across the organization, with our clients. And so they all have relational elements embedded. Similarly, when we're in change, whatever change methodology you may use as a model, there are things like communication, monitoring, identifying needs. All of these require collaboration to do this, right? So in whatever arena you are, and often they're embedded because we need leaders to help with change, we need that human relational aspect in order to be successful.
Point, of course, is that you would try to find a sort of a balance between, let's say, the planning aspect and the human element. So any ideas on how you would put that into balance? Because the one can't do it without the other, and the other way around as well. You need both elements to be successful in projects, I think. How is your vision on that?
Certainly. So I think that often when leaders are grown up through organizations, which often happens, when they're put into a leadership role the first time, they may be given those more hard skills, like how to manage the budget, how to do a performance review, whatever it may be. Those I think of as more the hard skills, but they aren't taught the soft skills if they don't naturally hold them as a way that they typically work. And you mentioned them being kind of basic, and I do think of the ideas of the senses even as a little bit simple sounding, but to actually effectively do them, we need to be very intentional. So as leaders, I think it's important when we lift new leaders, we want to give them both sides of that as training. So, and if we've been in a leadership role and we feel like one of our sides is stronger than another, we can intentionally try to shore up the side that we think may not be as strong. And there are different ways you can do that, through training, through reading, what have you, mentoring, coaching. But I think it's really important to be intentional. So again, with the traditional or original 5 senses, and I do like to say that I recognize not everybody has every sense, but then they usually have an increase in another sense. So I recognize that. But however we experience the world, typically, sometimes we have passiveness in that. We aren't intentional. And so when I'm talking about the 5 senses that I've created, I really like it to be very purposeful, very focused, where I'm really thinking about how am I observing, how am I listening, what am I feeling, and how is that displaying to others? I think it's very important to have a balance between, often in workplaces we shut down feelings, but that's not very human, or doesn't honor our humanity. And other times you might see leaders or others override people with their feelings in a way that might not be healthy. So I've seen both. And it's finding that balance and recognizing that we are human, we do feel, even if we don't like to talk about it, even if our natural tendency is more thinking than feeling, we do still have feelings as humans. And that's part of our way of experiencing the world. And then being intentional on how we engage and how we appreciate. Often in leadership, we get so busy, we have so many pressures on us for success and reaching goals and addressing all the stakeholders, that we don't just step back and take time to think, how can I show my team I appreciate that? How can I show each individual I appreciate that? And it doesn't have to be huge, right? It can be thanks and observing what they're doing that's excellent and acknowledging that.
How do you approach leadership in this? Because the main part, and this is the book also where it's about, but it's also what I think, is that if you can transform leadership in the right way of acting, in the right way of steering teams, in the right way maybe of coaching teams, that's maybe even the better way of doing it.
I think that our first opportunity as a leader, did you have more you were going to say? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I think our first opportunity as a leader is to model that which we want to see. Mm-hmm. So if a leader wants their team to be great communicators together, they have to start that chain, right? And so the self-reflecting aspect is important, and making sure that when there are interactions, if you feel something didn't go well, taking the time to reflect on what you could have done differently and experimenting with that in the future to see how you can make shifts that might be more successful.
And how do you approach leadership or a manager? If a manager is there and you coach them, how do you approach them yourself? How do you do that?
Yeah, so when I work with a leader or manager, executive to manager, or even new leaders as I'm training them, what I like to do is use very much a coaching practice. So it's asking questions to guide them to find their own innate intelligence around these things. Yeah. And I believe that we all have the capability and we know a lot, but sometimes it's not surfaced, it's not acknowledged. We have that lack of confidence or fear around what we're being asked to do. And so I do a lot of questions to help them surface their own strengths and knowledge. And then if I feel like they're struggling to come up with a plan on a specific need that they need to address, then I will ask, would you like to brainstorm on this? Because I've worked with a lot of people, so I have ideas that I've seen other leaders employ. And so if usually they say yes, and then if I start throwing out, I've seen this or that, then they actually start coming up with ideas too. So then we become in this space of co-creating, but then they choose what way of working, what tactic works for them. And so I'm really big on helping each leader find their own unique leadership style that can be successful for them, for their organization.
Mm-hmm.
And is this approach well received, or do you find some hurdles to overcome? Or personal hurdles like this is too much of a soft approach, and I'm a big leader, so I don't need all these soft nonsense. Is there is this the sort of reaction you sometimes get, or is this well appreciated?
Well, I would say that sometimes it's not well appreciated, because sometimes I'm working with leaders who've been asked to work with a coach, and they may not think that they have something to address. So sometimes that can be an initial barrier. But I try to work with them to ask them, so if you keep moving forward the way you have been, what's going to happen? How is that going to evolve for you? And I get them to acknowledge where they may kind of stagnate in their growth, and that's not usually what they want. And by them acknowledging that, then I start asking, could we experiment? Could we brainstorm kinds of questions? And then typically it will shift into a more, yes, I want to tackle these things. Some people naturally gravitate toward these concepts, and some people have much more of those hard skills that are asked to address the soft skills. So it can be either way.
Yeah, so it's a differentiated approach actually, but differentiates per person. You assess the person and then make the approach fit to the characteristics of the person.
Right.
Okay.
That's really important. And, I try to do that. Well, there are a lot of frameworks out there to try and understand and use certain language to describe people, right? But none of us fits in specific buckets. There's Myers-Briggs, or, I can't even think of any right off the top of my head, but there are those different platforms that you can use to come up with common language. But we are unique and multifaceted. And so I try very hard to get to know the unique individual through the engaging, the listening, the observing, really trying to dig deep into who they are. In mediation, we often talk about what our position is in a conflict is usually like the tip of the iceberg over the water. And what we need to understand is what's underneath the water. What are their core concerns? What are their identity factors that are coming into play that are making them approach something a certain way? And how can we help them understand where this may be getting in their way and maximize those things that have made them successful?
Yeah, I see. Very good. Well, it was absolutely interesting and good to talk to you, Julie. We're coming about to reach the end of the podcast. So thank you very much already so far for what you have shared with us, all your insights and views. Is there maybe any short statement, sort of an elevator pitch, you would call it in America, I think? Is there some sort of a statement you'd like to close the podcast with to inform our listeners and viewers?
So in the book, I close this way, and I'd like to do it here today since you've given me the opportunity. Thank you. I think that we all have made mistakes at times in the way that these concepts are used. We all have had interactions that have not gone well, sometimes due to our own part in that. And what I like to finish with is the sense of hope that we can all shift and evolve and practice these and be more intentional to try and build these skills. Even though they seem simple or basic, as you heard earlier, they are super important in how we are effective with other people to complete work. So there's always hope, and we can continue to evolve and make this a better set of workplaces that we reside in, and we can even take those out into the community.
Okay, thank you very much. The idea is that in Europe, the skyscrapers are not as big as in the US. Your elevator pitch was absolutely fitted in the skyscraper area. Thank you very much, Julie. And thank you very much for joining us, and hope you get all the success you want with your book. And thank you again for being with us tonight. Thank you very much, Julie.